continues in verse 22 to give all of the details to the disciples about when to know when the kingdom of God is going to arrive in the days of when the Son of Man is going to be able to be noticeable. And so he gives them the concept about the lightning shining and flashing out of the part of the sky in verse 24. He talks about then the days of Noah in verse 26 and 27 and 28. And when he gets to verse 28, he not only already talked about the state of affairs on the planet Earth with Noah, but he now brings in Lot, which we didn't get in the Matthew rendering. I'm going kind of fast because we covered this in previous teachings. But he's working his way towards the idea that just like it was in the days of Noah, it will be in the days of the Son of Man. And then he talks about, starting in verse 31, this separation that we've been talking about. Two will be on the housetop with his, on that day, people will be on the housetop. Don't go back to get your goods. If you're in the field, don't turn back as well. Remember Lot's wife. But then when he drops back down to the verse 34, from verse 34 down basically to the end of this chapter, he gives three examples. Matthew only gave us two. He says, I'll tell you, in that night there will be two in one bed, one will be taken, the other will be left. So that's extra from Matthew. And then in verse 35, we have the two women grinding at the same place, or two women in the mill, like we saw earlier. One will be taken, the other will be left. And then in verse 36, two will be in the field, one will be taken, the other left. And our question again is, who is the taken and who is the left? And then Luke gives this odd place for the saying where he asks, where the disciple said, where, Lord? And he says, where the body is, there the vultures will be gathered. We're going to find a pastor's opinion as to why this gets inserted here to support the view that the taken are those who are taken in judgment and destroyed, whereas those who are left are those who are left behind to enter into the kingdom of God. Similar to the sequence of the way it appears in the parable of the wheat and the tares that we just read about earlier in Matthew chapter 13. So let's now begin to ask more pointedly, who is taken, who is left, and see if we can make some sense of this. So we've looked at all the relevant passages. Let's first turn to David Guzik. He's the one that we've been borrowing primarily for this section. Starting in section 3 of his commentary of Edited During Word, which covers verse 40 through 44. We have Jesus cautions his disciples to be ready for an unexpected coming. And then you've got the verses again. Two men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken, one will be left. And then Jesus says, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. Again, the larger picture here, not just about who's taken and who's left, but the larger picture is, are there two events? Is there a rapture and then a second coming? And if there are, why is it that we don't know the hour or the day when the Lord is coming, but yet according to Daniel's timing that we've looked at earlier and that we will look at here in a moment, we do actually know the day, because Daniel is given a chronology of when the abomination of desolation takes place at the midpoint of the 70th week of Daniel, which is the final 7-year slice of history. Towards the end of the 70th week, we are given events like at the end of the 1260 days, then there'll be 1290 days, then 1335 days or something like that. In other words, there's an extra 30 days at the end of the 7 years, and then an extra 45 days at the end, after the end of the 30 days. In other words, an additional 75 days between the end of the week and the bringing in of the kingdom. I'll show you a chart here in a moment, so don't worry if you're confused. First, I want to get out of the way this taken and left discussion and disagreement between some Christians. Who's right? Is the taken the righteous and the left behind the wicked, or are the taken the wicked and the left behind the righteous? So David Guzik says, speaking of this passage, we'll pick up our commentary reading right here. We left off with a cliffhanger last week, right? What's his perspective, and how do we solve this dilemma of taken and left, and no one knows the day or the hour, but yet we can know the day and the hour based on what Daniel said, all right? Two men will be in the field, one will be taken. Jesus here points to curious disappearances, to a catching away of some at the coming of the Son of Man, also described in 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17. He then goes on to remind us that taken, and we'll look at taken again in the Greek, but right now David Guzik is just reminding us it's the same verb that's used elsewhere in Matthew earlier, and it implies to take someone to be with you, and therefore, you ready for it? Points to the salvation rather than the destruction of the ones taken. And Guzik is quoting France. So according to Guzik's perspective, those who are taken, quoting France, those who are taken, based on the Hebrew word or the Greek word, which I think is some form of paralambano, just off the top of my head, which is made up of two Greek words, para and lambano, which means to take to yourself closely. Para is the close aspect, and the lambano is the take aspect, and the nearness part of it is the first part, para lambano. Well, according to Guzik, this is an indicator that those who are taken are those who are the good, the righteous, and it points to salvation. But again, there are pastors who say it's the opposite. So we'll try and see if we can make sense of which one it truly is. Then Guzik talks about how that, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. Since the day and the hour of his coming are unknowable, Jesus' followers must be on constant guard for his coming. And then he says, and I'm trying not to reveal the answer just right away, because we're going to get to it in a second. He says, here again is what we call the second coming dilemma. And then he's got these 2 bullet points. Is the second coming at an unexpected hour, or is it positively predicted? And then, 3 bullet points. Is it business as usual, or is it worldwide cataclysm? And then the final bullet point, is it meeting him in the air in 1 Thessalonians 4:16 and 17, or is his coming with the saints as foretold way back in Zechariah 14:15? So we'll get to the answer here in a moment. But first, let's deal with this dilemma of taken and left. Who is taken, who is left? All right, remember, according to the weeds and the tares parable in Matthew 13 that we read earlier, the ones who are taken sequentially first are those who are the tares. They're taken in judgment, or they're taken in they're taken so that they can be gathered to be burned, like it says right here in, let me see, there we go, 40, 41, and 42. The weeds are gathered up and burned with fire at the end of the age. They're thrown into the furnace and fire, and they'll be weeping and gnashing teeth. So sequentially, the taken in this rendering from Matthew in this parable is the wicked. And then in verse 43, we can see the line of demarcation. Then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. So they are left behind to inherit the kingdom. All right, let's first turn to a commentary. Let me find it here. Yeah, I had it right there. By Thomas Ice. He's got these notes that he offers on Matthew's rendering about the one will be taken, one will be left, in interpretation of Matthew 24 and 25. All right, so it's just this part of the commentary that we're really focused on. I'm just going to basically, from this point, read a lot of this down through without trying to stop and explain what's going on, since I've already done my explanation. We'll read down through this gentleman's blog commentary, which is available at blueletterbible.org. And then we will go back and kind of entertain a bit of the discussion about it. So he's got the quote again from Matthew 24, the relevant verses 40 through 42. 2 will be in the field, 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. 2 women will be grinding the mill, 1 will be taken, 1 will be left. Therefore be on alert, for you do not know which day your Lord is coming. Okay, let's read his notes. Let's start right here. In the early 70s, in the 1970s that is, probably the most popular song within the Jesus movement was one entitled I Wish We'd All Been Ready by Larry Norman. I was involved in this movement, and we rarely met when we did not sing Norman's song. This song about the rapture includes the following lines. So now let's see what the rest of this commentary has to say. And then we've got a quote here from the song. A man and his wife asleep in bed. She hears a noise and turns her head. He's gone. I wish we'd all been ready. 2 men walking up a hill. 1 disappears and 1's left standing still. I wish we'd all been ready. Okay, so that's the song. And this author continues. Christian author, by the way. While I tend to like songs about the rapture, I generally like this song, I do not think Matthew 24, 40 through 42 compare Luke's 17, 34 through 37, which we looked at all of those. I do not think that this is a reference to the rapture. Instead, Christ has in mind his second coming. Now, notice right away, he's already dipping into part of the question that we've been entertaining as well. Are there 2 events? Is there a rapture and a second coming? Or is it one event where we just go up really quick and then we come right back down really quick? Are these events separated by 7 years? Are they separated by a few months? What's going on? We'll look at that shortly. So let's talk about what's going on. It says 1 will be taken. All right. He says, the illustration used in this parable is straightforward in both examples. There will be a separation where one individual will be taken and the other left behind. Let me do this. I don't like the way it's highlighting. There we go. There will be a separation where one individual will be taken and the other left behind. Also, in context, it is clear that one is a believer and the other is not. This describes a clear separation process, something I've always been maintaining all along, but we don't have to have sharp differences if we both at least agree on those basic aspects. He continues, the question related to this passage is who is taken and who is left behind. And remember, he said earlier that this passage is a reference, he does not think this is a reference to the rapture. Instead, Christ has in mind his second coming. So notice that difference right away. Now, with that context, we can keep reading his passage. So here is a blog here, his explanation, his commentary, short essay. The question related to this passage is who is taken and who is left behind. Those who hold to pre-tribulationism have argued both ways on this issue. Does this refer to the believer being taken and the unbeliever left behind, or just the reverse, where the unbeliever is taken away and the believer is left to enter the kingdom? Okay, what's his option or his perspective? I believe the latter view is correct. It is the unbeliever who is taken away in judgment. Now, remember, he's saying that this is the second coming, not the rapture. Okay, at this point, for those of you who are not quite following along why I keep making that distinction, I'll bring in a few charts. So we've got this first chart that is familiar to us. So we're reading left to right. On the far left of this chart, this is a view known as the pre-wrath view of the chart, because the rapture takes place somewhere, if you look at the top of the chart, where reading left to right, we've got Antichrist makes covenant, then we've got abomination of desolation, then we've got coming of the Son of Man, date unknown. That third arrow reading from left to right, that says coming of the Son of Man, date unknown, that's the rapture. But notice it's well into the 7-year tribulation, into the 7-year slice, and it's even past the halfway mark. So in this view, the rapture takes place sometime in the second half of the 70th week, sometime in the second 3.5 year mark, in that second 3.5 years, after the midpoint of the tribulation, I'm using the word tribulation because that's the popular term that's assigned to this last 7 years of history, even though I disagree with the word tribulation there. But the point I'm trying to bring up is that the rapture is where the third arrow is pointing to, where just at the beginning of that yellow arrow that you can see on your screen where it says Day of the Lord, that's the front part where the rapture takes place. And then to the farthest right of the screen where it says Jesus' reign in Jerusalem begins, that last arrow, the fourth arrow on the farthest right at the top of your screen, that is the second coming. So notice the distance between those two, the gap between the coming of Son of Man and the Jesus reign of Jerusalem beginning, i.e., notice the difference between the rapture and the second coming. So that's one version. Here's another version of the pre-trib rapture. This is a pre-trib. So that first slide I showed you was pre-wrath. It's just kind of an overview of the perspective that I hold to. This is the most popular view that you're looking at right now. We'll get more into rapture in my next set of topics. So this is really just kind of a whet your appetite teaser for the purpose of identifying who's taken and who's left and when. So we're not really getting into the discussion of which rapture view is correct at this point in time. I'm just using these slides. We will use them again when the time comes to deal with rapture. But notice, reading left to right again, on the far left, we've got two arrows kissing each other, a black one and a white one. The rapture is the white arrow pointing up, and the black arrow is Yeshua meeting us in the air. So those are that's the timing at the beginning or at the outside of the 7-year period known as the tribulation. And then when you follow all the way over to the right side of the screen where it says second coming, we've got the black arrow pointing down. That's Jesus returning with the saints at the end of the 7 years to usher in the millennial kingdom. But notice the separation between the rapture on the far left and the second coming on the far right is this giant 7-year time frame. And so this gentleman that we're reading right now says that Yeshua's words in Matthew are dealing with the second coming, which is the one on the far right, which means those who are taken are those who are taken in judgment. Okay, that's his perspective. Here's the pre-wrath view I just looked at a moment ago. The black and white arrows that are kissing each other are after the midpoint and about halfway through the midpoint, as opposed to being at the far left at the beginning of the 7 years. So you're well into the 7 years. The pre-wrath rapture takes place there. The second coming, this is a bit misleading as far as my use of the word second coming. They put the word second coming there and rapture as if they're the same event, but my understanding is that the word second coming should be slid a little farther right. Maybe I'll find another slide that does that later on, or I'll modify this one myself. But I believe that second coming should be at the farthest right of your screen, whereas pre-wrath rapture should be where the two arrows are kissing each other. So that's another one. And then we have a popular view known as post-trib rapture. This is held by a lot of Messianics that I encounter who believe that the rapture and the second coming are essentially the same thing. They're both just called the second coming. There's no need to separate this event called rapture, because so quickly we'll just go up and then we'll meet the Lord in the air, and then we'll just come right back down to planet Earth, and there won't be any significant time frame between the two, and therefore it's not necessary to separate this event known as rapture. It's just an aspect of second coming that is really the same event as rapture. They're the same time frame, maybe even on the same day, and it all takes place at the farthest end after the 7 years have run their entire course. Therefore, and we go through everything, God's wrath, the tribulation, wrath of Satan, all the bad stuff, and Jesus rescues us at the farthest end. But either way, the who's taken and who's left, still, for this pastor that we're reading his notes on, the taken and left applies to the fact that the taken are those who are taken away in judgment, and those who are left to inherit the kingdom right after the second coming takes place. So those are some of the charts that I wanted to show you. Here's another one, another chart that is the pre-trib view. Rapture here on this chart is just in front of the bright red square that reads the tribulation. So it's in front of the 7-year tribulation. In other words, pre-trib, meaning we do not go through the tribulation as the church, as the saints. Therefore, the rapture and the second coming are separated by 7 years. And according to this view that we're looking at right now, those who are taken are those who are taken in judgment at the end of the 7 years. In other words, near the time of the second coming of Christ, and those who are left behind are those who are left to inherit the kingdom age, which is 1,000 years on this particular slide. Same kind of time frame going on. This is just a different slide that just shows you some of the details that happen after the midpoint of the week, owing to the fact that there's this dilemma about how can we not know the day or the hour of Yeshua's coming if the return, i.e. the second coming at the far right of every one of these charts, remember reading left to right, if the second coming at the far right of any of these charts has already been prophesied by Daniel to take place at least after 1,260 days, and then after 1,290 days, and then after 1,335 days, right? If that's when the kingdom is coming, then how can Jesus say that no one knows the day or the hour? At the very least, he can only say that no one knows the hour, because clearly Daniel knew the day and gave it to us. He spoiled the whole thing, right? Spoiler alert, spoiler alert. Daniel spoiled the whole second coming of Christ, right? That's the dilemma. All right, we'll deal with that in time. Okay, so here are the two events that I didn't show you this slide last week on purpose because I wanted to kind of leave it for you as a secret, but these are the two events that many pastors are working from. On the left side, we've got the rapture in blue, and on the right side, we've got the second coming in orange. And these are the two bookend events that are either separated by 7 years in some charts, or they're separated by a short slice of time in other charts, or they're right on top of one another. In other words, they're consecutive with one another on other charts, rapture and second coming. Well, which one is right? Here's another chart featuring the exact same thing, rapture on the left in yellow, second coming on the right in blue, and we'll begin to look at these in time. And then here's a view that we're going to get to in time, where this particular author says that the rapture on the left, Christians are taken and the wicked are left, and on the right side, the second coming of Christ, the wicked are taken and the Christians are left. And we'll ask, Is that what's going on as well? Well, so these are kind of a preview of where we're going in this particular study. So now, having said all that, let's go back to this particular pastor's notes. His last statement that I read was, "It is the unbeliever who is taken away in judgment at the second coming, not the rapture." Okay. So he continues. He says, "As I've been arguing throughout Matthew 24, the focus is upon the second coming, while the rapture is nowhere to be found in this passage." So that's his context of saying that the wicked will be taken and the righteous will be left. In Matthew 24, our Lord is teaching about the events leading up to his return, tribulation events in Matthew 24, 4 through 26, followed by a revelation of a second coming, which is then followed by parables that drive home lessons related to his previous teachings, right? Matthew 24, 32 through 51. He says, "I think it would be inconsistent to introduce parables about the rapture when he has not taught about that event in this particular passage." All right, so that's his perspective. He continues, "It is true that when the rapture occurs, there will be a separation of believers from unbelievers when we are snatched away from planet Earth." So notice, he says that when the rapture takes place, we believers will be what? Snatched away from planet Earth. He continues, "It is true that somewhere there will be two people together and one is taken while the other is left. However, that is not what is spoken of in Matthew 24 because of the context." So again, this is his perspective. He goes on to say that these parables are making points about what Christ taught in Matthew 24, 4 to 31.